Back in 2001, Capcom redefined third-person action gaming and helped usher in the hack-and-slash genre. Nearly 2 decades later, and they're back on form with Devil May Cry 5. After an already impressive start to the year with the Resident Evil 2 remake, Capcom are reminding gamers why we love games. Not games as a service, not cinematic interactive experiences, proper out-and-out games.
Give this new toy.
So, what is Devil May Cry 5? Devil May Cry 5, or DMC5, is a hack and slasher that's all about style. The way the story is presented, the way the characters behave, and most importantly, the way you play. The combat is built to be fast and ever-changing, full of constant combos and maintaining the flow. In order to get a good score, you'll need to chain together different moves from melee attacks with swords, ranged attacks with guns, and acrobatic aerial attacks, all while avoiding hits from your enemies. Fans of the series are reunited with the previous protagonists, Dante and Nero, both of whom are freelance demon hunters at Dante's company, Devil May Cry. When they're not saving the world from the latest megalomaniac trying to take over the human world, they're blue-collar workers exterminating demons to pay the bills. The half-demon, half-human Dante is overflowing with cocky swagger and charisma, while Nero is a bit more hot-headed and angsty. This time around, players also get to control newcomer V, a very mysterious individual who employs the DMC boys to put a stop to the latest demonic takeover. All 3 characters play very differently and come with unique skill sets, abilities, and weapons. So what's so great about DMC5? At its core, DMC5 is all about the gameplay. In what may seem like archaic game design to some, players will navigate through levels, not sprawling open worlds, slaying demons along the way in closed arenas to progress. The gameplay itself is very familiar, as many of the systems are the same as we saw in DMC4, but there are plenty of new additions to make it feel fresh, particularly with V. Even if his playstyle isn't really for you, he's definitely a very unique character compared to the platinum-haired swordsman. While the approach to gameplay is the same it's always been since the beginning, the visuals are obviously an enormous upgrade. Running on the always stellar RE engine, DMC5 manages to keep its signature stylish over-the-top gameplay while framing it with gorgeous photorealistic visuals. I mean, apart from Trish's really weird face. It is a Japanese game, so much of the facial animation is rendered to closely resemble the dialogue of that language, but doesn't get too distracting or stray too far from the English in most cases. When it comes to English dubs of Japanese properties, the performances of dialogue can be hit and miss, but here they're easily among the best. The voices of Ruben Langdon, Johnny Yong Bosch, and Brian Hanford perfectly capture who their respective characters are. I'm sure some purists will probably switch to the Japanese, but don't feel like you're getting a weaker experience in English.
Now I get it. Who brought the marshmallows? 'Cause I'm bringing the fire.
What's the game actually like to play? It's in DMC's gameplay loop where you'll find if this game is for you or not. Some may call it dated and repetitive, but I say you're just not playing it right. Lots of games these days go for the play your way angle, giving you exhaustive options on how to approach encounters. DMC is much more straightforward in what it wants you to do, but don't mistake that for a lack of complexity. You can probably clear most areas by spamming the same moves without too much trouble, but the real strength in DMC lies in how you experiment with combos and different weapons to kill enemies as stylishly as possible and achieve those triple S ranks. The first half of the game will probably feel quite easy to most DMC veterans, even on the hardest available difficulty. The difficulty does eventually pick up slightly, and the final boss is exactly how final bosses should function. They force you to use all of the skills you've been honing throughout the game in order to bring this guy down. During my final battle, I was using every single button on that controller to come out on top, but maybe stock up on some gold orbs in advance so you can revive instead of having to do it all in one go. The game will likely take you 10 to 15 hours on your first playthrough, and I emphasize that last part. The game is meant to be replayed. You are meant to practice your skills and get better scores. Previous games in the series have about 6 difficulty modes, and I assume that's the case here, having just started my Son of Sparda playthrough. That's the 3rd difficulty level available. If you're going through and playing at least one extra mode, that will likely push your total game time closer to the 20-hour mark. And there's the Bloody Palace Challenge ladder that's coming as free DLC soon, possibly with a new character. Series fans probably already know who that might be. What's the story like? When it comes to Devil May Cry's story, you're not really going to be met with all that much depth. The story is delightfully cheesy as ever, with ridiculous cutscenes that will have your head rolling or your whole body flinching. Personally, I fall in the first category. There is one particular scene, and you'll know it when you see it, which will either be painfully cringy or the funniest thing in the entire game. To be honest, it's kind of both, and that goes for most of the story. DMC5 is a game that isn't afraid to be silly and laugh at itself. God of War grew up and matured, but DMC proudly sticks true to its campy roots. While that goofy story is there, it's more sparsely dished out than in previous entries and is quite backloaded to the last few missions. Much of the first half is the characters being confused by the villain's identity, which is obvious to the audience. DMC has never been one for subtlety. There is foreshadowing and then there is telegraphing. This works when played for dramatic irony, but when the major reveal is made to the characters in the last 3 missions, it feels like too much time has been wasted, especially considering we as the audience already know. Despite being far from subtle, the main twist will be satisfying to series fans who have been following the whole saga. As for the mysterious V, his origin is explained but comes out a bit too shallow and could have done with a little bit more lore behind it to make it less because plot. I've already said that DMC is a series that's not really about narrative depth, but just a little more would really add to the story since we don't get that much of it. Another new addition to the series is Nico, Nero's gunsmith. Not much background is given to her, but not much is really needed. I do think that her role could have been filled by Nero's muse Kyrie from the previous game because she doesn't feature in this game at all outside of a few off-screen lines of dialogue. Again, this would add just a little more depth to the story and flesh out Nero's motivations. Nico's not a bad character though, she does walk the line of being funny or annoying, so you'll have to make that decision for yourself. How is the game designed? The game design of DMC5 will probably feel dated to some, but in an industry filled with overstuffed games as a service games, DMC feels remarkably fresh. It's a game that knows what it wants to be and executes that pretty damn well. While I love the blend of cutscenes and gameplay seen in games like God of War or Red Dead Redemption 2, there's something to be said about just sitting down to kill some monsters, relaxing after a hard fight with a showy cutscene, and then carrying on with the killing. Of course, the killing couldn't continue without the weapons, which are as integral to the game as the style system is. They go hand in hand. The more weapons you have, the more stylish you can be. Unfortunately, V doesn't acquire any new weapons, but Nero and Dante do. Nero gets new Devil Breakers developed by Nico. These are robotic arms with unique functions that distinguish Nero from the other characters, and help to supplement his familiar DMC4 gameplay. Dante's weapons all add a nice flavour to combat, particularly the Balrog gauntlets and Cavalier motorcycle. If a motorcycle as a weapon sounds silly, then you haven't been paying attention. DMC is the kind of game to say, what's cooler than a rocket launcher? 2 rocket launchers. When it comes to the enemy types in the game, they're not as memorable or easily recognizable as some others in the series, but there's still plenty of them. Some familiar demons do return, as do some bosses inspired by earlier entries, which links in with the story. Is it good value for money? Value for money is incredibly important, especially in an industry filled with hollowed out, infinite hour bore fests. DMC5 respects your time with a humble 10 to 15 hour runtime, but if you're just playing it once, then I can't recommend its good value. If, however, you're playing the game it's meant to be played, you'll get dozens of hours out of it, and you'll have an amazing time with each and every one. So if you're playing it like that, that's definitely value for money in my book. Speaking of money, the game is unfortunately sick with the plague of microtransactions. While it obviously goes without saying that they'd rather they weren't there, they are completely benign. Their inclusion is harmlessly pointless and doesn't seem invasive. The only time you really notice it is when trying to revive using red orbs and you're prompted to buy more if you don't have enough. And if you're a proper DMC player anyway, you'll be saying, no thanks, I'll stick with fighting harder and earning my victory. Another symptom of AAA gaming sickness found here is the gated content in the special editions. In it, players get exclusive access to Devil Breakers for Nero and a skin for Dante's Cavalier weapon, as well as some ugly color swap skins. Restricted content like this, especially the Devil Breakers, which are key to gameplay, is always bullshit, so DMC can't get a free pass.
Cool trick. Hey, do you do parties?
Do you have to have played the other DMC games? As with any new addition to an existing series, the question arises whether you need to have played the previous games to enjoy this one. With DMC5, you can definitely have a great time without having played the others because, at its core, it's all about the gameplay. Story-wise, there is a handy story so far cutscene that you can watch that will catch you up on the past events, but DMC3 definitely has the best story in the series, and much of what happens there informs the relationships of characters here. DMC4 serves as a nice introduction to Nero and will explain why his demonic arm was so important to him before it was ripped off prior to the game's main story. That demonic arm is then replaced with the Devil Breakers as mentioned before. If you enjoyed the previous DMC games, will you enjoy DMC 5? If you enjoyed the previous games, then you will definitely enjoy this one. The gameplay is probably the best it's ever seen, and is more of what you liked in the earlier games. The story, unfortunately, will leave something to be desired for newcomers and probably veterans, but isn't terrible by any means and functions well enough. This is a game for people who like action games, but also for people who just like games. Games without the AAA fluff or filler clogging up the experience. It's 10 to 15 hours of pure quality gameplay, and even more if you're willing to fight for it. If the difficulty seems too much for you as a newbie, the auto assist function will help you blend combos together until you're ready to put your big boy pants on. DMC 5 may not be a typical AAA game, but it's easily a triple S. That's just what I think. Hop on over to Patreon to check out our latest podcast. I've been Henry, this has been Pretty Good Gaming. Catch you later, bye for now.